thank you everybody for joining and to this webinar around cost management and optimization in Azure. Just a sort of little bit of housekeeping. Obviously, this session is being recorded, and we will be sending out links to the slides and the recording after the end of this session for anyone that couldn't make it or wants to review that content at a later date. Yes, so I think without further ado, let's get started. So by way of an agenda, so what we're going to be talking about is got myself and my colleague Craig on the call, and I'll run the first little bit where we'll do some introductions, both to ourselves and a little bit about Ultima, and then Craig will take over and we'll talk about generally about sort of challenges and difficulties you might face in sort of cloud adoption and managing the costs therein. And then he's going to talk a bit about particular sort of tooling and optimization methods that that are available. And then towards the end, we'll give you a little indication about how we can help you in those areas as well. So yeah, so myself, my name is Angus Mack. I'm the head of the practice, cloud practice. So I look after our services and Microsoft third line managed service teams here at Ultima. I've been in the industry just over 21 years, graduated in 2000, which seems both not that long and also quite a long time ago. I spent probably around 7-8 years working in and around Azure. I was working for Altius Avanade prior to Ultima and did a couple of years inside Microsoft as well. And yeah, my role really at Ultima is to build on and develop our service consultancy services and managed service offerings within the Azure space. And then also on the call is Craig.
Yes, hi everyone. So Craig Wordsworth, I am the head of cloud pre-sales here at Ultima. So my ultimate responsibility is to work with Angus from the pre-sales perspective to drive adoption of public cloud across our current and net new customers. And I do that through the definition of new strategies, refinement of existing strategies, making sure that obviously all the services that we're providing are, are relevant to our customer base. I do have a team of pre-sales engineers that work underneath me as well that obviously will go out and work alongside the account managers on those kind of opportunities as well. Okay, I've been in the industry about 11 years, so I've been an Azure, specifically an Azure consultant, if you will, for the past 5 to 6 as well. And just drop down our email addresses at the bottom. So following this, and appreciate you might have some questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. But if you prefer to get in contact with us directly, then please feel free to email either of us directly and go from there. Thank you.
Yeah, cheers, Craig. And also, I know that you probably had an invite through your account director or account manager related to your business. I see on the attendees list, we've got a few attendees from some current customers of ours as well. So welcome to everybody. And yeah, I guess for those of us that don't know Ultima, I've just got a couple of very sort of quick slides just to sort of highlight what we do. So obviously today we're going to be talking about Azure cloud, about cloud management and around cost optimization in that space. But Ultima has been around for a while. We've got strong partnerships not only with Microsoft but with other hardware and software vendors such as VMware and Citrix and Cisco. Yeah, we have a broad range of offerings, not only I say in the cloud space, but in terms of desktop, modern workspace, and in security and in managed service. I don't want to spend too long on this, but essentially we have a sort of breadth of offerings that we have, and then we also have our own development offshoot called Ultima Labs, where we develop software IP, some of which Craig will touch on in a second. And then on the next slide, I suppose we sort of summarize from a sort of high level business point of view the areas that we cover. So Craig, just show the next one.
Yeah.
So essentially, it's split across 5 different tiers. At the top, we have our managed services split into 6 different categories around infrastructure, desktop security, digital platforms, our service desk, and then also token-based support. Then we have our managed security practice, which deals with all sorts of things, such as patching as a service, managing firewalls, threat detection and response, and then a consultancy services, which we sit in terms of we have business consultancy, to more strategic C-level conversations around transformation goals, technical consultancy, again, so where I sit in terms of cloud there, we also then have a dedicated security and also PM practice as well. And then in terms of the platforms we've got, so we're very big on automation. Ultima has quite an early adopter in terms of seeing the importance of automation, and that's something very dear to my heart as well, in terms of obviously the more processes that you can automate, the more consistency that you get in your delivery, the better experience the customers have, and the human effort can be put into the interesting side of the particular challenges that our customers face in terms of their transformation journeys. And then also from a managed service point of view, support becomes easier, again, through that consistency, because the types of delivery are known, and we can deliver a better, more reliable service in that area. Yeah, and then down the bottom, we've got our lifecycle services around software and hardware. So that's it. I don't want us to be sort of too preachy about Ultima, because I think looking at the list, that quite a lot of you know a bit about us. So I will hand you over to Craig now, who will take you on to the next section.
Yeah, no problem. So I thought, to be fair, the best kind of place to start is where we as Ultima see kind of some of the challenges coming about with regards to why kind of cost management is really a key thing. So just to kind of start off with, to be fair, based on my own really experience, to be perfectly honest, generally, from my perspective, it's a great thing that a lot of organizations look to move into, public cloud, in this case, Azure, on their own internally, effectively, just to build that I suppose that mindset up, build that tooling, that capability, the skill sets up and those kind of elements as well. But generally, where I suppose challenges come about is that kind of mindset moving from private to public cloud, if you will. You think of the kind of the background of some of these engineers who will be possibly building within Azure initially. They'll have like a VMware type of the infrastructure background. Okay, so just taking a look at what that private cloud background actually is. So you think about it, when you come to a refresh of any kind on the infrastructure, we predominantly looking to design for failure. And what I mean by that is we're expecting a failure at the infrastructure layer. So we build in additional capabilities, at multiple points to make sure that we can sustain a single failure of any kind in isolation. So thinking about examples on compute with N+1 resiliency, multiple disk groups and multiple disks for redundancy, for example, hot spares, those kind of things, resilient network switches and resilient network connectivity as well. Generally making sure if any one of those elements in isolation fails, we can sustain that failure at the infrastructure layer and carry on working rather than having to invoke any kind of business continuity practices. Okay, extending that out, when we're looking at this refresh cycle, we gather the requirements for compute, storage, resource, whatever that might be. We then look to align typically a 10% year-on-year growth model across the life cycle of that platform that we're expecting it to. So it says 3 years plus. Experience is generally 5 to 7. We build that up. We make sure that we've got that kind of planned growth model in place, so we don't have to buy any more hardware, throughout that process, unless it's unplanned. And then once we've migrated this platform, it's generally a static resource. So whilst we might, monitor these services, make sure that they're up to date and secure, the patch and whatever that might be, we might rebuild them if we have to to upgrade the actual core application software. We don't really do anything else with them. They're generally seen as that written off investment. We've migrated now. It's stable for the next few years until such time that we need to refresh again. Okay. But conversely, looking at like the public cloud kind of mindset, we need to embrace that failure model in the sense that we have no access to the infrastructure underneath. Yes, we're provided with service level agreements from Microsoft, you know, and depending on the service, depends on that SLA that we get. But we need to make sure that we build that resiliency into the application. So whether or not it's multiple servers sat behind a load balancer, for example, whether it's traditional business continuity practices of virtual machines, whether or not it's geographically dispersing an application and utilizing global DNS to make sure we can have access to it and it can sustain a regional failure, for example, we need to embrace that failure model, okay? But not only that, when we're given a set of requirements, we don't build growth into it. We effectively build based on what we've been told that an application service or whatever it needs. And then we go through a continuous lifecycle model at that point, whereby we're constantly trying to realize efficiency. And what I mean by that is not just looking at it from a perspective of, okay, I've done the migration into, let's say, in Azure now, and that's fine for the next 3 to 5 years. I'm constantly looking at that platform, understanding if it's a VM, can I right size it? Can I size it down or up based on the actual resources it's using rather than what I've been told it needs? Are there any other services that I can leverage? Platform as a service, for example, whereby I can rely further on Microsoft to deliver a service, take some business as usual tasks away, but then derive a lot further value back to my business, but also lower the cost. And we're constantly needing to go around in circles and look at that from that perspective. Now, as a result of that private cloud kind of mindset, in 2020, Gartner estimated that 70% of overspend on cloud spend is by organizations who do not have an effective plan for cloud cost management. So you can start to see how, if you don't have that kind of mindset up front, this is when we can really start to, you know, for lack of a better term, waste money in terms of Azure. Okay. Now I step back a little bit from that, to be fair. In my opinion, it's obviously cost management is one fundamental part of it, but there are multiple areas of a strategy that we need to make sure that we get right, if you will. We need to get sorted up front before we migrate into public cloud. Now, cost management is just one knock-on effect of that. But if you attack that in isolation, there will still be other areas of wastage that you'll end up accruing, if you will, because you've not looked at those other areas as well. Now, if we kind of look at those reasons for overspend, we kind of highlighted that it's a mindset thing. You know, you don't know what you don't know, which is not a bad place to be in any way, shape or form, because inevitably we've got to start from somewhere, right? But it's that planning up front as we're stepping into this platform. So, you know, the knock-on effect really, if we have the wrong team or the wrong skill sets who don't necessarily understand fully what needs to be identified as we migrate into Azure, whether it's VM-based or rehost or it's otherwise into a replatform into PaaS services, you know, whether or not it's the wrong emphasis, whether it's very much a cost-saving exercise rather than what are the specific reasons are we wanting to move into public cloud platforms such as agility, flexibility, and those kind of things. This leads to the next three kind of elements: poor landing zone designs, poor, you know, foundational kind of principles that we need to build into Azure, for example, to make sure prior to migration, to make sure that we've got the relevant kind of framework, we're securing, we're governing the platform effectively prior to migration. And obviously, if we don't really understand fully the ramifications of migrating and how that might look and what do we need to do, we can mistime that services effort. You know, even if we do it internally, you know, a lot of the time you end up underestimating the amount of time that's needed. And a 3-month project can turn into a 6 or 12-month project. And then moving past that as well, that then leads to hidden costs from a resource perspective, but also then hidden costs on a public cloud platform for things such as egress costs and stuff like that. So it's really, really key that we get this strategy sorted up front before we actually migrate, or just build into public cloud in general. Now, the reasons for that, we've already kind of mentioned, to be fair, you know, a lack of skills and resource, to be perfectly honest, and that's not to devalue, obviously, what an infrastructure guy does, but in terms of then from a public cloud perspective, purely from that experience, it's that lack of skills and resource that generally is the knock-on effect. But the challenge is even if we have those resources, we have someone who has Azure skills in an IT team, for example, it's all around lack of time as well, because inevitably they're also going to have business as usual tasks, business as usual, you know, elements that need to be, you know, looked after, etc. You know, sometimes mundane tasks whereby, you know, it could be a bit of wastage, but whatever that is, you know, that time available is also a key thing that actually does inevitably, you know, lead to challenges with public cloud adoption. And obviously, if you wrap those all, amalgamation of those two really is the fact that then the focus isn't really there. So little to no strategy for that foundational services, those landing zone kind of kind of areas, and then obviously tooling around enabling cost management, monitoring, security. The list kind of goes on, to be fair. So again, it comes back to making sure that we try to make sure we have that effective strategy moving forward. So bringing it back to cost management and optimization, so what can we actually do? What can you as a consumer of these services actually do, with in the platforms to make sure that we're being as efficient as possible? Well, on a good note, there's native tooling available across all the public cloud, or the key public cloud vendors, if you will. So you can see kind of an image on the right-hand side, whereby there are a plethora of different services that we can consume. That is also an advantage and a disadvantage, because whilst there is a lot of information that you can actually derive from within the public cloud providers natively, and they are free to use to actually get that information, they are complex by design because there are multiple interfaces that we need to jump through to understand what our monthly revenue or monthly consumption costs are. B, then understand of those costs, which services are we consuming the most, because that's where you'd spend most of your time to try and save any money. And then C is, how do we derive the value from that? How do I read that in an effective way to understand what I need to do? And then past that as well, if I do manage to get that far, how do I make sure that I can actually implement those changes as well? And that's where the difficulty comes in. Okay. There are also third-party tools that we can look to use. Key examples are called Cloud Health, Cloud Checker. There are a few. Quick search on Google, for example, will illustrate that there are a number of different SaaS tools that you can use. And these kind of take it a bit of a step up. They abstract all that data and give you a single pane view, which is really, really great. You can see on the right-hand side, for example, you can see cost history. It starts to give you that visualization without you having to do, in theory, much work in order to get that information. But these are paid for tools, right? So basically then they generally are paid for as a percentage of your monthly cloud consumption. So I think 3-5%, for example, if a bit of an indicator in terms of how much that they may cost. So they grow with you as your consumption grows within Azure as well. But the challenge that you've got there is they are typically only focused on cost optimization. Okay, so that's the core purpose of these tools, to give you that visibility and to give you the recommendations. They won't necessarily tell you how as well. They might give you a little bit of pointers in the right direction, but they won't necessarily tell you how to do that. But there's other areas that we need to focus on: security, governance, and those kind of things. How well are we aligning to cybersecurity standards and stuff like that we also need to look at. Now they do in some cases provide that information as well, but again, it's deriving it in the right way. Okay. Now, in terms of third-party tooling, Ultima do also provide, or have actually built a tool called IA Cloud. So just taking it from there, to be fair, this is a tool that we've got so much confidence in that it actually is used as a foundational pillar for our managed services as well. So it's available as a perpetual kind of piece of software, but also we use it internally as well. Okay, it's developed internally by our own team called Ultima Labs. So they're basically a function within the business themselves, separate, if you will, where they have the autonomy to build the services what they think that they need. But just to give you an example of obviously then where it focuses on. So I've mentioned obviously cost management optimization, understanding that your monthly bill and your consumption cycle, understanding the individual resources that you're using, and obviously then which ones are making up the majority of the bill, therefore which ones do we need to focus on. And then obviously, of course, at that point, then it's understanding what are the opportunities, what are we very confident about in terms of then how much money can we save you, what are the potential opportunities that need a little bit more human intervention, but we can separate out them accordingly, which is, again, one key pillar. They also look at security from a Centre for Internet Security Standards perspective. So Centre for Internet Security, if anyone is unaware, is basically a group of cyber experts who define, obviously, set standards in how you should operate and secure within public cloud in general. So we can follow that kind of rule, that rule set that they've created and derived, if you will. Examples would be how you would secure, making sure firewalling is in place, making sure RDP, for example, isn't open to the internet and stuff like that. But then it goes past that, to be fair, because again, that's another key pillar. But how can we enable you as an IT function to move away from what I define as the mundane tasks, that you do on a day-to-day basis, that you spend a lot of time with, and move past that and allow yourself to actually focus on something like a public cloud adoption, upskilling yourself and your team, So you're ready for this kind of migration, etc. And moving away from those, or using another tool that can actually automate those. And that automation is really, really key. So Angus mentioned it up front. We're really adopted in terms of automation. And really what you need to be looking for is tools and features that can actually enable those capabilities. So examples such as documentation, making sure that you've got an up-to-date view of what your public cloud environment looks like. So, when someone asks you, when there's a new starter, whatever, there's a leave, or whatever that might be, we've got a foundational kind of framework where we know what that platform looks like, what services we're using, and how they're being consumed. But past that is things like patching and malware, those kind of things. These quite easy technologies that we can kind of hand off to other tools to do, very much can automate the onboarding of new services. Let's say I build a new virtual machine within Azure IaaS, and I want the peace of mind that it's going to be protected from day one. Those kind of things can be handed off to a tool, for example, which is exactly where, in my opinion, you want to go. Okay, but past that as well, for anyone who is at the very beginning of that cloud journey, for lack of a better term, and you are looking at how you might migrate, you want to understand, you might have a refresh cycle coming up, you've got an end-of-life platform on-prem, and you want to understand what would a cloud migration look like. Well, certainly the first avenue is going, what is the worst case cost for running in Azure, for example? And that's exactly what this tool can do. So you can actually take an output from RV tools. For VMware, for example, we can also take an output from Hyper-V. We can pump it into IA Cloud, and within 30 minutes, it can give us an understanding of what the as-is configuration, so taking the current resource allocations to virtual machines from on-prem into Azure with the operating systems, etc., to understand compatibility. What would be the ramifications of doing that? Now, I'm keen to stress that's a worst case cost. So we do perform what we call right sizing as we go into Azure. So again, the concept of resizing an application or a server based on what it needs. But we can give you that kind of visibility. And so if you're interested in that, then please feel free to get in touch. And then finally, as well, it's based on the environmental impact. So a lot said about carbon neutrality at the moment, and what we can actually provide is what would your carbon footprint be if you move to an Azure-based solution, for example, and it puts it into key terms rather than just CO2. It'll tell you how many equivalent miles in the car and the average car would be, and how many trees that will save and stuff like that. It's broken down into two key kind of areas. So automate is all around that automation piece that we mentioned on that third bullet point down, and then optimize is all around the cost management. And you can take two at the same time, or you can take either or. So, if you're looking at a tool, I suppose the key thing is this is the kind of tool you're going to want to be looking for in terms of that cost optimization. Generally, that tooling will enable you to derive that visibility in much, much easier. Okay. So just stepping through in how Ultima can assist. So if you're basically if you're in Azure today, or you're very beginning, irrelevant to be fair, we can either way. To be fair, we can actually assist in multiple ways. Please feel free to get in touch. But let's say you're already in Azure and you're consuming a certain amount. Costs might be running away with you. Where would you start? To be fair, and this is kind of where partners do come into play, just to give you that visibility in. Okay, so one such service that we've got is called Cloud Analyse. It's a non-obligation, free of charge service delivered from within the pre-sales function. So me and my team obviously deliver this. Non-obligation is a key word here as well. There's nothing here that's trying to tie you into anything. It's just purely to give you that value back, to understand how well you are functioning within Azure, pardon me, what you're doing well and what you could improve upon. Okay, so it's a 3-week process to provide that visibility into those consumption costs. So what we're trying to do is give you that visibility, much like a cost management tool would look into, but also looking at best practice alignment as well. So I mentioned cost optimization or cloud optimization, which is a really key pillar of operating within Azure. Okay, but for me, it's not the only pillar. So obviously, we will always look at that, because cost inevitably is the driving factor behind a lot of migrations, of course, or a lot of operations within Azure. And through that, we look at the general areas around orphan resources, the concept of things that have been left behind. When you've deleted a VM, for example, you might have left a disk behind, and it still costs money because it's provisioned. That concept of right sizing, where I mentioned not just looking at the as is from a resource allocation, it's understanding how much resource a server is at or service is actually using, and then sizing it down based or up, but typically down based on that usage profile. So obviously we're not spending too much money on allocated resources that we're not using. And then it's also around reserved instances. So the concept of committing upfront for 1 or 3 years, typically for infrastructure as a service, but also some platform as a service offerings do enable this or provide this. And the idea is you achieve anywhere between 20% or 20% and 70% savings in comparison to pay-as-you-go on-demand pricing. So it's really, really powerful. And we take you through the ramifications of what that would look like and how that would work. But like I said, that's only one key pillar of the environment. It's making sure that you are aligning to best practice, because that's the kind of the other side of the coin in terms of then how we operate effectively within public cloud. So architecture is a really, really key piece. You may have heard of the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework, for example, and basically that is a set of best practices and principles that Microsoft have derived and recommending how you should build, deploy, architect, and operate within Azure. Okay, that stretches out to a multitude of different factors, so it's quite a lot of information by design. But also as well, we start to look at things like networking. Okay, how well are we at networking? How are we connecting in? What does it look like from a tagging perspective? So the concept of aligning set pieces of information, but owner, environment, application criticality, those kind of things. Having set data that we can align to all resources across the platform, which is really, really powerful moving forward. So off the back of that, we can monitor based on a tag, we can automate based on a tag, we can cost manage based on a tag, we can show back, charge back. There's a lot of stuff that we can do based on that foundational kind of service, which are free to utilize within Azure. So it's really, really key that we get those right. And then lastly, that's all around that security piece. So governance policies are really powerful as well. Another free to use kind of service within Azure, whereby we can set and align a set of rules that we want the platform to self-govern itself across, with. So good examples would be data sovereignty. I want to make sure that users can only deploy within the UK regions, because then I'm actually inevitably aligning to data standards and stuff like that. So allowing it to self-govern in a certain way, but alerting when things aren't being kind of followed as well. But that then stretches out to firewalling, encryption, and those kind of things as well. Okay. What we do is we deliver them into the form of a PowerPoint presentation. So once we've done all the analysis using IA Cloud, we do actually request reader access into your environment as well, just to understand, and basically have a look in terms of where the tools don't go, if you will, before we drop them into a PowerPoint presentation deck. And obviously that will then contain all the findings, all the recommendations, and then inevitably as well how we feel it would be best moving forward. To reiterate, it's a non-obligation service, so we provide you a PDF copy once we've discussed those findings with you. You provide a PDF copy of that presentation deck, and you decide what you want to do with that data. If you choose to go away and make changes, whatever yourself, by all means. But Ultima obviously would love to work with you moving forward, should there be a commonality there as well. Okay. But in summary, though, to be fair, what we've spoken about really is it's very, very easy to consume in Azure, but also overspend in public cloud. And obviously there are a multitude of different factors that can actually enable that to happen, to be fair. But when we do identify that we're overspending, maybe the cost has grown significantly over the course of a few months or a year or whatever that might be, it's really quite complex to understand those monthly bills, what services you actually use, how much you're spending, and what optimization opportunities there are. Even past, obviously, once we've identified them, how we actually make those changes for the better. Now, tooling is available to provide that visibility, but as we've seen, not all are created equal. So obviously, when you're looking for tooling, make sure that you understand exactly what you're looking to do, exactly what you want to get from those tools, especially from the paid-for ones. Not so, like I said, it's not just a cost-based play at that point. It's looking at security, governance, best practice alignment, and those kind of things. But stepping back, that cloud strategy is really, really key. Okay, not just cost management. There are a multitude of different areas around how we provision and orchestrate and automate, how we would then align back business continuity, how we would secure and govern, and those kind of things as well. So everything around that needs looking at. Now, obviously, we highlighted Ultima can assist with that cloud analyze service, but we can assist in multiple ways as well. So if you're wanting to understand what that strategy would need to look like. You know, if you're at the very beginning of a journey or in the middle of it, to be fair, and you want to just take a step back and understand how well you've done, whatever that might be, and you're interested in any of the services that you might have heard of, or you just like a chat with your account manager, or just have a bit of a conversation, please feel free to get in touch. As mentioned, we've dropped our email address at the very front of this presentation. And obviously then for those of you who are current customers, obviously you'll have your account managers you can reach out to as well. Okay. I'd like to thank you for your time. To be fair, just to reiterate, you will get, this is a recorded session, so you will get a copy of the session and a copy of the slides